I never thought leaving a neighborhood association would spark the kind of chaos that followed me through the summer of last year. I'd been living in Willow Creek Estates for nearly 15 years, long enough to see families come and go, lawns change hands, and the HOA board cycle through its predictable parade of power-hungry personalities. But none of them, and I mean none, came close to Karen Miller, the woman who turned a neighborhood committee into her personal empire. The kind of person who'd measure your grass with a ruler, complain about the color of your mailbox, and send a written citation if you dared to leave your trash can visible for more than 3 minutes after pickup. She wore her President of the HOA badge like a crown and treated every resident as her subject. When I first moved into Willow Creek, it was different. My late wife, Sarah, and I fell in love with the quiet streets lined with oak trees and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air on weekends. Our son, Ethan, was just 7 at the time, all scrapes and smiles, always on his bike, racing through the cul-de-sacs with the neighborhood kids. Back then, the HOA was more of a friendly gathering, a group of volunteers who genuinely wanted to keep the place beautiful. But as the years went on, and Sarah passed away, things began to change. The new residents brought with them a hunger for control, and when Karen moved in 2 houses down, she took over like a hostile corporate merger. At first, I tried to ignore her antics. I kept my head down, paid my dues, and followed the rules, at least the reasonable ones. But Karen's obsession with control turned the neighborhood into a living nightmare. She started imposing new fines that weren't even in the bylaws. She banned certain decorations, dictated paint colors, and even sent out monthly newsletters filled with passive-aggressive rants about maintaining neighborhood standards. The last straw came when she tried to force me to tear down my shed, something I'd built with my own hands 20 years ago, back when Ethan was still small enough to hand me nails and call it Dad's fort. One morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. The paper flapped in the breeze, practically glowing in the sunlight. According to Karen, my shed failed to meet the HOA's updated aesthetic requirements. She gave me 7 days to correct the issue or face escalating fines and potential legal action. I laughed at first. Surely, she was bluffing. But by that afternoon, I'd received 3 more emails and a phone call from her, each message colder and more threatening than the last. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I called an emergency HOA meeting. I told the board I was resigning from the association and would no longer be paying dues or abiding by their nonsense rules. I'd consulted my attorney, who confirmed that, under state law, I could legally withdraw since my property deed predated the revised HOA covenants. I presented the documents at the meeting, clear as day. But Karen refused to accept it. She slammed her gavel on the table so hard the room fell silent. "You can't just leave, Daniel," she hissed. "This is a community. You're part of it whether you like it or not." I looked her in the eye and said, "Karen, I've given 15 years to this neighborhood. But I'm done. You want to play dictator? Play without me." Then I walked out, leaving the papers on the table behind me. For a few weeks, it was bliss. No emails, no fines, no meetings. I spent my mornings fixing up the gardens Sarah used to love and my evenings on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Ethan, now a 30-year-old police sergeant, often stopped by after his shifts to check in. He'd joke about Karen, calling her the sheriff of Willow Creek, and we'd laugh over beers. But peace doesn't last long when someone like Karen's involved. It started small. Trash cans mysteriously knocked over. My mail misdelivered. Lawn service guys suddenly refusing to come by because they'd heard complaints. It was petty, but it built up, a steady hum of harassment I couldn't ignore. Then, one Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of police sirens in my driveway. I stepped outside to find 2 squad cars and 3 officers standing beside Karen, who had that smug, self-satisfied grin plastered on her face. "There he is," she shouted, pointing at me like I'd robbed a bank. "That's him, he's in violation of community law, and he's threatening the peace." The officers looked unsure. One of them, a young guy, approached me with hesitation. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance and property dispute. You're Daniel Hayes?" I nodded. "That's me. But there's no disturbance here, unless you count Karen's constant harassment." Karen interrupted, waving a clipboard. "He's trespassing. His property is still under HOA jurisdiction. He refuses to comply with regulations. I'm the HOA president, and I'm pressing charges." I could see the confusion in the officers' faces. They weren't sure how to handle this suburban power struggle. I sighed, rubbed my temples, and said, "Officers, this is a civil issue, not a criminal one. I have documentation that I'm no longer part of the HOA." But Karen wasn't having it. "He can't resign. That's not how it works. We voted to deny his withdrawal. He's still bound by the rules." The lead officer asked, "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that he's broken an actual law?" Karen blinked, clearly thrown off. "He's violating HOA codes." "That's not the same as a state law," the officer replied flatly. Her face flushed red. "You're not taking this seriously." "I'm taking it exactly as seriously as it deserves," I muttered. The officers wrapped it up quickly. "No arrests, no tickets, just a warning for both of us to keep the peace." But the look Karen gave me as they left said everything. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, I called Ethan. He listened quietly as I explained everything. When I was done, he said, "Dad, don't worry. I know her type. She's playing a control game. But she's about to find out what happens when she crosses a line." I didn't realize then just how prophetic that would be. 2 nights later, my security cameras caught her sneaking onto my property, clipboard in hand, flashlight beaming through my backyard like a searchlight. She was photographing my shed again, muttering under her breath. I stepped outside, calm but firm. "Karen, you're trespassing." She jumped, spun around, and stammered, I'm performing an inspection." "Not on my property, you're not. Leave before I call the cops." She smirked. "Oh, I already called them." I frowned. "For what?" "You'll see," she said, and stormed off toward her car. An hour later, the same officers showed up again. Only this time, Karen wasn't waiting outside. She'd apparently told them I was armed and dangerous. I was stunned. They approached cautiously, hands on their holsters, until I raised my hands and showed them my empty palms. "Gentlemen," I said, "this is getting ridiculous." Once they realized there was no threat, they left, again. But by the next morning, I'd made my decision. I printed out every piece of documentation, every harassing email, every false report she'd filed, and took them straight to the local precinct. Ethan was there, behind his desk, reviewing reports. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. "Dad," he said quietly, flipping through the stack. "She actually did all this? She's obsessed. And now she's calling in false police reports." He stood, grabbed his jacket, and said, "Okay. She wants to play legal games? Fine. Let's play." Over the next few days, Ethan worked within the system. He coordinated with the precinct to flag Karen's repeated misuse of emergency services. Apparently, she'd called in a dozen times in the last month, reporting everything from illegal gardening to unauthorized construction. It was abuse of resources, plain and simple. But she didn't know that the next time she picked up the phone, the person on the other end would be my son. When Ethan told me he was taking over the case, I thought he was joking. I couldn't imagine my son, the same kid who once used my workshop as a secret detective office, when he was 10, actually handling a situation involving his own father and the most unbearable woman in Willow Creek. But he wasn't joking. That night, he sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, a stack of printed call logs beside him. His expression was calm, but there was a storm behind his eyes. "She's filed 14 false reports since July," he said, scrolling through the records. "Most of them about you. Some about other neighbors, too. It's harassment, Dad. Abuse of emergency services." I took a slow sip of coffee. "She's got nothing better to do." He looked up. "It's not just that. She's trying to make your life miserable enough that you either sell the house or crawl back into her HOA. It's a power trip." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the kitchen window. The moonlight caught the edge of my old shed, still standing strong after 2 decades. "I built that shed with Sarah," I said quietly. "Every time Karen threatens it, it feels like she's tearing apart a piece of her memory." Ethan nodded, his tone softening. "Then she's messing with the wrong family." Over the next week, Karen's campaign escalated. She started spreading rumors around the neighborhood, that I was unstable, that I'd threatened her, that the police were keeping an eye on me. It was classic Karen: spin a lie, repeat it loud enough, and eventually someone believes it. A few of the newer residents started avoiding me. One couple even crossed the street when they saw me mowing my lawn. But not everyone bought into her drama. Old man Peterson from across the street, who'd lived there longer than anyone, stopped by one afternoon. "Don't let her get to you, Dan," he said, handing me a cold beer. "That woman's been itching for a fight since she moved in. Half the neighborhood's tired of her crap. You leaving the HOA just gave her a target." "Yeah," I sighed. "I didn't realize freedom came with a bullseye." He chuckled. "You'll get the last laugh. People like her always dig their own holes." I didn't realize how true that was until the night everything blew up, literally and figuratively. It started on a Friday evening. I was grilling on the back porch, music playing low, just enjoying a rare bit of peace. Ethan was off duty and planned to swing by later. The sky was painted orange and pink, and for the first time in weeks, I actually felt relaxed. Then, just as I was flipping the stakes, I heard the sound of tires screeching outside. Karen's white SUV came barreling down the street and screeched to a stop in front of my driveway. I frowned, put down the tongs, and walked around front. She jumped out, waving a stack of papers like a maniac. "This is your final warning, Daniel," she shouted, her voice echoing through the cul-de-sac. "You are in violation of HOA property regulations." "Karen," I said evenly, "I am not in your HOA." "You are," she barked, stepping closer. "We voted. The board unanimously decided your resignation was invalid. Your board has no authority over my property." She jabbed a finger at me. "You think you're above the rules because your son's a cop? Because you used to be on the board? You're not special, Daniel. You're just another delinquent homeowner." I laughed under my breath. "Karen, I've dealt with tougher people than you. Take your papers and leave." That must have hit a nerve because her face twisted with rage. "Fine," she yelled. "You want to ignore the rules? Let's see how the police handle it." She stormed back to her SUV, slammed the door, and peeled off down the street. I shook my head, figuring she was bluffing again. But 20 minutes later, I heard sirens. 3 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing red and blue against the windows. I stepped outside, hands up, exasperated. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. The lead officer approached cautiously. "Mr. Hayes? We received a report of a violent domestic disturbance." I blinked. "A what?" Karen was standing a few houses down, recording everything on her phone like she was starring in her own reality show. "There's no disturbance," I said calmly. "You're being played. That woman's been harassing me for months." The officer looked uncertain. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Go ahead," I said, waving toward the house. "You won't find anything except a half-cooked steak." After a quick walk through, they came back out, looking annoyed. One of them said, "This isn't the first false report from this address, is it?" "Nope," I replied. "And I'm getting real tired of it." As they were wrapping up, Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, still in uniform, and the second the officers saw him, their demeanor shifted. "Sergeant Hayes," one of them said, nodding in respect. Karen's phone lowered slightly. Her smile faltered. Ethan walked right past them and straight toward her. "Mrs. Miller, can I have a word?" She stiffened. "Oh, Sergeant Hayes. I didn't know you were on duty." "I was just filing another false police report," he cut in sharply. "Do you realize that's a criminal offense?" Her face drained of color. What? "No. I called because your father, my father," Ethan interrupted again, his voice calm but icy, "hasn't broken any laws. You, on the other hand, have abused emergency resources, trespassed on private property, and harassed multiple residents. We have it all documented." Karen glanced around, realizing half the neighborhood had stepped outside to watch. Curtains fluttered, doors cracked open, cell phones were pointed her way. For the first time, she didn't look so powerful. "You can't arrest me," she shrieked. "I'm the HOA president." Ethan smiled slightly. "And I'm a police officer. Titles don't make you untouchable." He read her rights right there on the sidewalk while she sputtered and protested, trying to talk over him. One of the other officers stepped forward and gently placed handcuffs on her wrists. The look on her face was priceless: shock, humiliation, disbelief all rolled into one. "Ethan," she cried. "You can't do this. You're biased." He looked her square in the eye. "You're right. That's why I'm not processing the paperwork. Another officer will. But you're still under arrest." As they led her toward the cruiser, the neighbors began murmuring. Some even clapped quietly. Old Man Peterson raised his beer in salute. I just stood there, watching as the woman who'd made my life hell was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. After she was taken away, Ethan turned to me. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded slowly. "I'm fine. Just can't believe it's over." He sighed. "It's not over yet. She'll probably lawyer up. But we've got everything we need." He wasn't wrong. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal noise. Karen posted bail within a day and immediately started spinning her version of the story online. She claimed she was wrongfully arrested, that the HOA was under attack by rogue law enforcement, and that I'd manipulated my son into taking her down. But this time, her words didn't stick. The neighborhood had seen enough. The board voted her out within a week. The HOA was temporarily suspended pending an audit, and a local news station even picked up the story. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested for False Police Reports and Harassment." I kept a copy of that newspaper on my kitchen counter for months. Still, despite her downfall, part of me couldn't shake the unease. People like Karen don't just disappear quietly. They stew. They plot. They find new ways to crawl back into your life. And I was right again. 2 months later, long after I thought the dust had settled, I found a letter in my mailbox, no return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. Inside was a single sentence: "This isn't over, Daniel." That letter hit harder than I wanted to admit. I'd faced plenty of stress in my life, losing Sarah, raising Ethan alone, handling a demanding career, but something about that single sentence dug under my skin. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the handwriting. Sharp, deliberate, almost carved into the page like anger made tangible. I knew it was Karen's. I could picture her sitting at her kitchen counter, clutching a pen so tight it nearly snapped, pouring every ounce of spite into that note. I told myself to ignore it. She'd probably mailed it before the arrest or in one of her late-night fits of fury. But deep down, I knew better. Karen didn't know how to let go. She was like a storm that refused to pass, circling back until she destroyed everything in her path. A few days later, I caught glimpses of her SUV creeping through the neighborhood again. She wasn't supposed to be there, part of her bail conditions restricted her from contacting or approaching me, but she was clever. She'd park a few houses down, engine idling, pretending to be checking mailboxes or visiting a friend. Once, when I stepped outside to take out the trash, she sped off, tires squealing, the same white SUV disappearing around the corner like a ghost. Ethan wasn't happy when I told him. "That's a violation of her bail agreement," he said immediately. "You need to call it in." "I don't want to make things worse," I said. "If she's stupid enough to risk jail again, she'll hang herself with her own rope." He leaned forward across my kitchen table. "Dad, this woman's unstable. She's not going to stop until someone stops her." He was right, but pride got the better of me. I'd lived long enough dealing with bullies. I thought I could handle one more. Then the break-ins started. It began subtly. My garden tools weren't where I'd left them. A motion light on the garage flickered out. My mailbox hinge was bent one morning. Little things, the kind you could chalk up to age or forgetfulness, except I wasn't forgetting. I was paying attention. The final straw came one night when I found footprints by my shed, small, distinct, leading straight up to the locked door and back out again. That's when I installed the cameras, for high-resolution ones, mounted discreetly along the house and fence line. Ethan helped me wire them up, connecting them to a live feed on my phone. "If she shows up again," he said, "you'll have evidence. Don't confront her. Just call me." For a week, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. Then, one Sunday at 2:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the feed, and there she was. Karen. Dressed in dark clothes, hood up, flashlight in hand. She moved slowly, deliberately, circling the shed like a predator. Then she raised her phone and started taking pictures again. That time, I didn't go outside. I hit record, grabbed my phone, and called Ethan. He picked up instantly. "Dad?" "She's here," I whispered. "Right now. Stay inside. I'm on my way." It took him less than 10 minutes to arrive, but by the time his headlights hit the driveway, Karen was gone. Still, the footage was gold. Clear images of her face, timestamps, and even audio of her muttering something about non-compliance and illegal structure. Ethan looked at the playback and shook his head. "She's digging her own grave," he said. "This is stalking, vandalism, trespassing, all rolled together. We can take this straight to the DA." But I hesitated. Do we really want to drag this out again? She'll just claim I provoked her. "Dad," Ethan said firmly, "the law isn't about what she claims. It's about what she did. And she just gave us proof." He filed the report the next morning. Within 48 hours, there was a warrant out for her arrest for violating bail and trespassing. When the deputies went to her house, though, she was gone. The house was empty. Her car, her furniture, even her dog, gone. It was as if she'd vanished overnight. Weeks passed. The neighborhood began to breathe again. The HOA, now under temporary management, started making real reforms. Fines were lifted, community events returned, people smiled again. For the first time in years, Willow Creek actually felt like a community instead of a prison. But I couldn't relax. Every time I walked past a window, I expected to see that white SUV idling at the curb. Every creak of the porch made me look over my shoulder. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. The number was blocked. Mr. Hayes? The voice was female, calm, unfamiliar. This is Officer Reyes with the County Sheriff's Department. We've located a vehicle registered to Karen Miller near the state line. It appears abandoned. We'll need you to come by and confirm some details. My stomach tightened. Did you find her? Not yet, Reyes said. But we're working on it. I drove down to the impound lot that evening. Karen's SUV sat there, covered in dust, one headlight shattered, the driver's side door dented. Inside were a few personal items, papers, an old binder labeled HOA files, and a crumpled photo of Willow Creek's welcome sign. Something about it felt deliberate, almost staged. Reyes met me by the fence. Looks like she ditched it, she said. There's no sign of struggle. No fingerprints except hers. I nodded slowly. She's not done. Reyes frowned. What makes you say that? Because people like her don't run, they wait. They hide and they plot. Sure enough, I was right. About a month later, a new online blog popped up, The Real Willow Creek Watch. At first glance, it looked like a community watchdog site. But as soon as I read the first post, I knew exactly who was behind it. The author, under the pseudonym Concerned Neighbor Number 1, accused me and Ethan of corruption, abuse of authority, and systematic destruction of neighborhood order. There were edited photos, fake quotes, even fabricated testimonies from supposed residents. It was pure digital poison, and it spread like wildfire. Within days, the post had hundreds of comments. Some defended me, others didn't. People love drama, it's oxygen online. I tried to ignore it, but when a local reporter called for a statement, I realized I couldn't just hide from it. That night, Ethan came over again. He'd read the blog, too. She's using anonymity as a weapon, he said grimly. But digital footprints are hard to erase. We can trace her. He called in a friend from the cybercrimes unit, who began digging. It didn't take long. The IP address of Concerned Neighbor Number 1 traced back to a library 2 towns over, but surveillance footage showed Karen sitting at a computer there 2 days before the blog went live. They got her on camera again. Same face, same smirk. When they finally picked her up, she was staying at a cheap motel under a fake name. She looked disheveled, exhausted, but that spark of superiority was still there. When they cuffed her this time, she didn't resist, she just laughed. You can't silence me, she said to the officers. People know the truth now. Ethan was at the station when they brought her in. He told me later that she tried to bargain, claiming she had evidence of my supposed crimes. When they asked what evidence, she refused to answer. The DA pushed for multiple counts: harassment, cyberstalking, violation of bail, and misuse of public resources. It was enough to guarantee real time behind bars. The day of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. Half of Willow Creek showed up, eager to see the self-appointed queen face judgment. I'll never forget how she looked when the verdict was read. For once, she was silent. No defiance, no smugness, just shock. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, plus mandatory counseling. After the gavel came down, she turned her head toward me as the deputies led her away. Her eyes locked on mine. She didn't speak, but her expression said it all. You may have won today, but this isn't finished. For a long time afterward, I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Vindication? Maybe a little of both. But there was also an emptiness, a kind of quiet aftermath that settles in after a storm. I'd spent so long fighting her that I'd forgotten what peace felt like. Ethan tried to lighten the mood. "Dad," he said, clapping my shoulder, "you're officially the only man I know who got his HOA president arrested twice." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "That's not exactly a badge of honor." "Maybe not," he said, grinning, "but it sure makes for one hell of a story." We walked out of that courthouse into the sunlight, both of us thinking it was finally over. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake that feeling, that somewhere behind bars, Karen Miller was already plotting her next move. The day Karen was sentenced felt like a new chapter opening in my life. For the first time in years, the air around Willow Creek felt lighter, as if a constant pressure had finally lifted. Neighbors waved again, lawns looked greener, and people gathered on porches in the evenings instead of hiding behind drawn blinds. For months, the shadow she'd cast over our quiet neighborhood began to fade, slowly, but surely. I threw myself into restoring my property. I fixed up the shed, repainted the fence, even replanted the hydrangeas Sarah had loved so much. Every nail, every brushstroke felt like reclaiming something stolen. Ethan helped on weekends when he wasn't on duty, and it almost felt like old times, father and son side by side, covered in sawdust, laughing about nothing in particular. But peace has a way of making you forget how quickly things can unravel. Karen's absence was loud. Even from jail, she found ways to remind us she existed. A few of her loyal HOA followers, those who'd bought into her version of neighborhood order, started whispering again. They'd hold quiet meetings at one another's houses, claim they were reorganizing the HOA in her honor. I ignored them at first. After all, people like that needed something to cling to. But when flyers began appearing in mailboxes claiming Karen was wrongfully convicted and set up by the Hayes family, my patience started to thin. I confronted one of the ringleaders, a guy named Doug Sanders, a small-time real estate agent who used to be Karen's right-hand man. He was dropping off flyers near the cul-de-sac when I walked up behind him. "Doug," I said calmly, "if you have something to say, say it to me." He jumped like he'd seen a ghost, fumbling with his stack of papers. "Dan, I was just spreading more lies." I asked. "You realize she's in jail because she broke the law, right? Not because of some conspiracy?" He straightened his shoulders, trying to sound braver than he looked. "Karen just cared about the community. You and your son ruined that." I took a step closer. "Karen cared about control, not community. You want to follow her lead, that's your choice. But if you start harassing me or my family again, you'll regret it." Doug backed away, muttering something about free speech before hurrying off. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, I noticed strange cars parked near my house at odd hours. Sometimes they'd idle for a while, then drive off when I stepped outside. My mail started disappearing again. Once, someone spray-painted the words Trader T.O. Willow Creek on my back fence. Ethan wanted to open an investigation, but I told him no. "It's just kids," I said. "They're trying to get a rise out of me." But deep down, I knew it was something more coordinated. Then came the letter from the county courthouse. Karen's attorney had filed an appeal. I read the document twice, my stomach sinking with every word. She was claiming procedural misconduct, arguing that Ethan's involvement in her arrest was a conflict of interest. She wanted the conviction overturned, the charges dismissed, and, believe it or not, her position as HOA president reinstated. I could hardly believe the audacity. Even from jail, she was still clawing for control. Ethan came over the next morning, reading through the paperwork. "She's delusional," he said. "This appeal won't stick." I followed every protocol. Another officer processed her arrest, just like I said. "Still," I muttered, "she's trying to drag you into it. Make it personal again." He nodded. "That's what she does. She can't win by rules, so she tries to break them." The appeal hearing was scheduled 2 months later. I didn't want to go, but the DA asked me to testify again, just to reaffirm the harassment and clarify the timeline. The courthouse felt heavier that day, as if the walls themselves remembered the chaos of her last trial. Karen looked different when they brought her in. Her hair was shorter, streaked with gray, her face thinner, but her eyes, those same cold, calculating eyes, hadn't changed. When she saw me take the stand, she smiled, a small, unsettling curl of her lips that said, "I'm still here." Her lawyer argued passionately, twisting facts and painting her as a victim of police intimidation and familial bias. But the judge wasn't buying it. After hours of testimony, the appeal was denied. Karen would serve the rest of her sentence. When the gavel struck, she didn't lash out or yell this time. She just stared at me, calm, almost serene. That silence unnerved me more than all her shouting ever did. Afterward, Ethan and I grabbed dinner at a diner just outside town. He tried to keep things light, but I could tell he was still tense. "She's not done," I said quietly. He sighed. "Dad, she's behind bars. She can't touch us anymore." "Yeah," I muttered, staring out the window. "That's what I thought the first time." 2 weeks later, the local news ran a small piece about disturbances at the county detention center. Apparently, a group of inmates had started a fight in the cafeteria, and amid the chaos, 2 had escaped. One of them was Karen Miller. I found out the next morning when Ethan showed up at my door, pale and furious. "She's gone," he said. "They think she had help." I blinked. "Help? From who?" "They're not sure yet. But she didn't just walk out. Someone smuggled in fake ID cards, uniforms. This was planned." The next few days were a blur of anxiety. Patrol cars drove through the neighborhood regularly, checking in with me, keeping watch. I slept with my lights on. The sound of wind through the trees made my heart race. Every knock at the door made me jump. One night, around midnight, I heard something outside, footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped to the front window. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, just beyond the gate, a flash of white, someone standing near the fence, watching. I turned on the porch light. The figure darted away into the darkness, but not before I caught the unmistakable glint of blonde hair under the moonlight. "Karen." I called Ethan immediately. "She's here," I said. He was at my house within 10 minutes, lights flashing, gun drawn. But by then, she was gone again, vanished like smoke. For days after that, I barely slept. Ethan arranged for extra patrols, but even that didn't ease the tension. Every night felt longer than the last. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was imagining her. Maybe fear was making me see ghosts. Then the phone rang again. It was a blocked number, just like before. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A pause. Then her voice, calm, almost gentle. You took everything from me, Daniel, she said. But don't worry. I'm going to take it back. Click. The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I called Ethan immediately, but the number couldn't be traced. It was routed through some online masking service. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a vendetta. I installed more cameras, reinforced the locks, even put motion sensors on the backyard fence. Ethan had officers checking in every few nights, but still, that fear lingered like smoke that wouldn't clear. Then, one evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, something caught my eye. A car parked 2 houses down, a dark sedan, tinted windows. It hadn't moved in over an hour. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in with the camera. And there she was, sitting behind the wheel, staring straight at me. I didn't move. Neither did she. We just sat there, locked in a silent standoff, 2 enemies who dragged each other through hell and back. Finally, she started the engine, rolled down the window, and gave me a slow, deliberate smile before driving away. That smile haunted me for weeks. Ethan wanted me to leave town for a while, maybe stay with friends out of state. But I refused. If I run, I told him, she wins. I'm not giving her that satisfaction. He didn't argue, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Then we'll do this my way, he said. We'll end it once and for all. I didn't know what he meant by that, not exactly, but the determination in his voice told me Karen Miller's story wasn't quite finished yet. I didn't sleep the night Karen smiled at me from that car. Even after she drove off, the image stayed burned in my mind, that calm, knowing look of someone who wasn't finished. Every shadow outside felt like her presence, every creak of the house made me glance toward the window. For weeks, I lived like a man waiting for a storm to hit again, knowing the sky was too quiet to be real. Ethan started staying over some nights, sleeping on the couch in his uniform, service weapon always close. I told him he didn't have to, but he wouldn't hear it. Dad, he said, I've seen what she's capable of. I'm not letting her get close to you again. The local police increased their patrols around Willow Creek, but it didn't stop her. Every time they came, she vanished just before they arrived, no footprints, no vehicle plates, nothing but the eerie certainty that she had been near. It all came to a head one Friday night in early fall. The air had turned crisp, the leaves burning gold and red across the neighborhood. I was sitting in the living room, reading, when the motion alert on my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. Squirrels set off the sensors all the time. But then another alert came. Then another. I opened the feed. Karen was back, standing in my driveway, calm as if she owned the place. She wasn't hiding this time. No hood, no disguise. She was dressed neatly, her hair brushed, a clipboard in her hand like she was back on HOA business. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. She's here, I said. I'm on my way, he replied instantly. I stayed inside, watching from the window as she walked up to my porch and looked directly into the camera. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, then she slipped something into the mailbox and turned to leave. I waited until Ethan arrived with 2 other officers before going outside. The night was still, almost unnaturally so. I opened the mailbox carefully. Inside was a single manila envelope. My name was written on it in that same sharp handwriting I'd seen before. Inside was a copy of a newspaper article, an old one, about a tragic car accident 15 years ago. Sarah's accident. The one that took my wife's life. I felt my blood turn cold. Scrawled across the article in red marker were the words, it was no accident. My hands shook. I stumbled back, heart pounding, staring at the paper like it was alive. Ethan took it from me, his expression tightening as he read. "She's trying to break you," he said quietly. "She's digging into things she knows will hurt." But a part of me couldn't let it go. What if it wasn't just another manipulation? What if she'd found something I didn't know? The next few days were a blur. Ethan opened a formal case against her for stalking and harassment, and an arrest warrant was issued again. But she was gone, no car, no sightings, no trail. It was as if she'd evaporated into the wind. Still, I couldn't shake what she'd written. I started going through old files, police reports, insurance records, anything from the night of Sarah's accident. It had been raining that evening, her car had skidded off the road and hit a tree. I'd accepted it for what it was, a tragic accident. But the more I read, the more little inconsistencies began to stand out. A missing page from the report. A witness name redacted. A timing discrepancy. When Ethan saw me buried in paperwork, he tried to stop me. "Dad," he said, "don't let her control you through this. She wants you obsessed. That's how she wins." But I couldn't stop. "What if she's telling the truth?" I said. "What if this isn't just another game?" He looked at me for a long moment, then finally sighed. "All right. We'll look into it. Together." We pulled old case files from the county archives, tracked down the officer who'd handled the scene, a retired sergeant named Miller. No relation to Karen, thankfully. He met us at a diner off the highway, a quiet man with tired eyes. When I showed him the article and asked about the missing page, his brow furrowed. "I remember that night," he said slowly. "Rain was bad. Roads were slick. But I also remember something strange. Another car was spotted leaving the area just before we arrived. We never identified it." Ethan and I exchanged a look. "Did you ever mention that in the report?" he asked. The old sergeant shook his head. "Didn't have enough evidence to back it up. Chief didn't want speculation." We thanked him and left, but the unease grew heavier with every mile home. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at Sarah's picture on the mantel. I whispered, "What if Karen was right?" As if in answer, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number, another message. "You're getting closer." Attached was a photo, my shed, taken from somewhere behind the trees. Ethan arrived 10 minutes later, sirens off, gun drawn. "She's toying with us," he said. "She's been watching. Maybe for days." We checked the perimeter. The air was thick, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Behind the shed, we found footprints again, smaller ones this time, lighter. A woman's, likely hers. And beside them, half buried in the dirt, was something metallic. Ethan crouched and picked it up. It was a key, an old brass key with the number 14 etched into it. Neither of us recognized it, but when we showed it to the sheriff's department the next morning, one of the deputies said it looked like a motel key. They ran a search and found that it matched a small roadside motel 20 miles out, the same one Karen had used months earlier under a fake name. We drove there immediately. The manager remembered her right away. Blonde lady, always wore sunglasses. Paid cash. Room 14. When he opened the door, the air inside was stale, heavy with dust. But on the small table by the window sat a stack of papers, maps, and photographs, all of Willow Creek. My house circled in red. Ethan's precinct circled twice. There were also photos of Sarah's crash site. Recent ones. Ethan's jaw tightened. She's been obsessed for years. Among the papers was a notebook. Most of it was rambling, incoherent rants about restoring order, exposing corruption, reclaiming control. But one page stopped me cold. It read, "He destroyed my life. He took what was mine. Now he'll lose what he loves most." Underneath, taped to the page, was a photo of Ethan. That's when the fear shifted, no longer for me, but for my son. We turned the evidence over to the authorities. The FBI got involved since the case now crossed state lines and involved credible threats against law enforcement. Ethan was temporarily reassigned to another precinct under protective measures, but he hated it. "She's not taking me out of my own life," he said. "She's running scared, not me." Weeks passed with no sign of her. Then one morning, just before dawn, I heard tires crunching on gravel again. My heart nearly stopped. I looked out the window, nothing. Just the fog rolling through the street. Then the doorbell rang. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Ethan, but when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was two uniformed officers. "Mr. Hayes," one said, "we thought you should know, Karen Miller was found." I swallowed hard. "Where?" "About 50 miles from here. There was a car accident. Looks like she lost control on the highway during the storm last night." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Part of me wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was emptiness. "Is she?" The officer nodded. "She didn't make it." They left soon after, and I sat there for a long time in silence. Rain began to fall, tapping against the windows, the same kind of rain that had fallen the night Sarah died. Ethan arrived a few hours later, his face pale. "It's over," he said quietly. "They confirmed everything. The car, the ID, everything. She's gone." I nodded slowly, but even then, part of me couldn't believe it. Karen Miller had been like a ghost haunting every corner of my life for years. To think she was truly gone felt unreal, like a story without an ending. A few days later, I went to see her grave. It was small, unmarked, paid for by the county. No flowers, no mourners, no visitors. Just a patch of earth under gray sky. I stood there for a while, the wind cold against my face. "I don't know what broke you," I said quietly. "But I hope wherever you are, you finally let it go." Then I turned and walked away, feeling the weight lift, slow and steady. Life after that was quieter. The HOA was dissolved completely, replaced by a simple neighborhood association run by volunteers who cared about the place, not power. I rebuilt the shed one last time, this time stronger than ever, and placed a small plaque on it that read, "For Sarah, and for peace hard-won." Ethan eventually got promoted to lieutenant. He moved to a nearby city but still visited often. Every time he did, we'd sit on the porch, looking out at the street that had once been a battlefield. One evening, as the sun dipped low and fireflies began to glow across the yard, he said, "You ever think about how different things could have been if you hadn't walked out of that HOA meeting?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah. Maybe too different. Maybe I'd still be paying fines for the color of my mailbox." He laughed. "You know, Dad, you could have moved years ago." I looked out at the trees, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. "I built this house with your mother. I wasn't going to let someone like Karen take it from me." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "You didn't just keep the house, Dad. You took back your life." I thought about that for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah. I guess I did." As the crickets sang and the last light faded, I realized something. Karen had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd done the opposite. She'd reminded me of what mattered, standing firm, protecting family, and never letting darkness dictate the story. The past would always live in the corners of my mind, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt to look back. The world was quiet again. Peaceful. Whole. And this time, I knew it would stay that way.